Welcome to a new episode of InFocus with Ejaz Haider. This program is supported by the Center for Security Strategy and Policy Research. CESPA is an autonomous policy research center housed in the University of Lahore, and it tackles issues that impact contemporary security and strategic developments. This program is part of that effort. Pakistan is faced with what I call a three front conflict: the traditional East, the simmering West boiling over, and low intensity conflicts in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. The violent internal dimension is also in some ways linked to the conflicts in the East and West. This program is going to focus on internal violence, but it also has roots in the traditional conflict in the East and now the overt irregular conflict in the West. While India is a state in the traditional sense, Afghanistan is not, at least not in the way it is currently configured. But let me put it differently. While conflict in the East is conventional with a nuclear overhang where deterrence comes into play, the internal conflict and the conflict in the East have a different, somewhat elusive dimension. An additional problem is the debate within Pakistan over how to deal with Afghanistan and the TTP. Some think we can talk ourselves out of it, others want to war out of it. There's also an historical trajectory to where matters stand vis-a-vis Afghanistan and TTP. Then there's the Baloch terrorism, different from TTP's, even as the methods have commonalities. While the TTP wants to conquer Pakistan, if you will, the Baloch want to secede from this country. This must also inform formulation of different strategies, but that is not visible. To discuss where the situation stands and how well or otherwise the state can deal with the internal dimension, I have with me Dr. Dayyab Gillani, currently an associate professor in the political science department of Punjab University. Gillani was also, until recently, director, research and development at the National Counter-terrorism Authority of Pakistan. His research interests vary from political theory and moral philosophy to political violence and terrorism. With him is Iftikhar Firdous, a friend and a long-time investigative reporter and student of violent conflict and militant ideologies. He's founder and editor of the Khorasan Diary, a digital outlet that tracks and analyzes irregular conflicts in the region and beyond. Thank you so much for being on the program. We're going to focus on policy, where we're getting it wrong, also whether it's a mathematical problem which can have a solution after which we are going to QED it, which I believe is not possible. So we're going to have different approaches dealing with the problem in different ways. I also, as I said in my introduction, don't particularly believe in these binaries or pendulum swings, if you will, about whether we're going to war through it, whether we're going to talk through it. But let's first set the stage. And because Iftikhar is the man with literally his nose to the ground, there have been, I think, only yesterday, or was this earlier today, that there were 7 different attacks, minor attacks, or wide geographies in Balochistan. Things are also constantly happening in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So, if you could give us a sense of, like, a broad sense, then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of it, because it's a complex issue. A sense of where the situation stands and how many marks would you give to the state's riposte on a scale of 1 to 10?
So I think, Ejaz Saab, the way that you actually summed it up in terms of at least the trajectory of the borders where we're having the problem is pretty much clear. But how it is right now, we've got problems with Afghanistan. Afghanistan's got problem with Tajikistan. We've got problems with India. And then India has problem with China as well as Pakistan, and it's becoming friends with Afghanistan. But just to sort of give you a purview on how I view this conflict, because I think that it's Pakistan and Afghanistan's conflict is not just Pakistan and Afghanistan's conflict. And the more the stakeholders sort of flesh their muscles, what we're going to see is that we're going to end up into the large-scale proxy wars. It's easier sort of said than to be explained, and if we actually delve into it completely, we can still see that there are problems. Problems in terms of security policy, problems for internal politics, and problem for larger regional alliances. But the American election and the election of Donald Trump into the presidential office has actually had quite a paradigmatic effect on how these conflicts are viewed. Pakistan once again moving into the US camp, if I would say, or at least playing along the US geographic, scope of their operations, external operations, is actually one of those reasons that we see a lot of conflict and a lot of jittery politics within South Asia itself. But just to sort of give a glimpse in terms of how we
Just a
actually.
second. Just a second, Iftikhar. A clarification for the viewers. When you say that Pakistan is now playing along with the US strategy, what exactly are you talking? Are you talking about the US counterterrorism strategy over the horizon capabilities in Afghanistan and in West Asia generally? Is that what you're referring to?
I think that not just that, that as well, but in the larger sense of what the US policy at this time seems to be vis a vis not just Pakistan and Afghanistan, but also in the Middle East. And I think that one of the things that we need to look out to on what would actually be a future precursor for the next conflict or how this conflict actually evolves is how much actually Pakistan moves into the Middle East. The more leverage Pakistan will get into the politics of the Middle East, and particularly, the Palestinian issue, there will be problems on our borders as well, because that jostling of power is not easy. But also to explain it a little further, that I spoke to some of the Qatari and Turkish interlocutors that were, part of the negotiations between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and they actually view, the Pak-Afghan border not as just the Pak-Afghan border. They view it as a problem from MENA, which is Middle East and North Africa. And they believe that if this problem escalates, and that's why you see so much of interest, not just from Turkey and Qatar, but yesterday and today, but last night rather, there were negotiations that were held between the Pakistani delegation and the Afghan delegation once again in Saudi Arabia, and it's been quite a hushed up kind of an approach to those kind of negotiations. We haven't seen any way forward. When I spoke to a couple of people, they said that we'll let you know if there is any headway. But then again, we haven't seen the spate of attacks stopping or any statement coming in from both sides that there has been any resolution of this problem. But Ejaz Saab, if you actually plot all this conflict on the map, it was very evidently clear that whatever has been happening in Afghanistan does not only have it because there's a part of it that deals with the militant ideologies and strategies as you've defined it. But I think the larger goals actually revolve around two parts. One is the mineral resources. Firstly, and foremost importantly, I think it's the water resources that will be the future of conflict.
Okay. Okay.
And then
Okay.
the second
If
part of that is, yeah.
I'm going to come to that. I'm going to come to that. In fact, that's something that I want to put to Dr. Gillani also.
But
And
just
I,
one last point to that.
yeah,
And I
sure.
think that it was always evidently clear that from 2023 onwards, that this problem will actually, of terrorism, although we see it in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan, I think it's about time that it actually shifts towards the Gilgit Badakhshan region.
Okay. That sounds about right. I am also going to circle back to you on the MENA, factor that you've brought in, because that also needs clarification. But Dr. Gilani, uh, this is now becoming more than just the Afghanistan-Pakistan problem. We have recently seen cross-border attacks in Tajikistan, in which 5 Chinese were killed and equal number injured. We also have problems between Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Afghanistan. Specifically, not just, of course, there's the security issue also of the IMU, but the water problem that Iftikhar talked about. For instance, the Kosh Tapi canal issue has been hanging fire between Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and also Turkmenistan. Do you see these linkages, regional linkages with one particular country as a kind of roundabout where there is a particular government or a particular group that controls the government and the rest of the neighbors? And if those linkages are there, would you agree that perhaps Pakistan should adopt a multilateral approach rather than just simply a bilateral approach to this problem?
Right. Thank you so much for that. It's actually a very thought-provoking question, and I think it sort of moves the focus away from the bilateral relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and sort of again looks at the broader Central Asia and Pakistan region. I think that at the end of the day, and insofar as the Pakistan-Afghanistan issue is concerned, it is, for all intents and purposes, it should be treated, at this stage at least, at a bilateral level. And the reason being because the issues that the two countries have, and in terms of their history, if you go back into the history of Tehrik-e-Taliban itself, which is the bone of contention between the two countries essentially. So the issues between these two countries essentially are bilateral in nature. And those issues, the kind of issues that Pakistan and Afghanistan are confronting, I don't think they can be resolved at a multilateral level to begin with. Secondly, I think Pakistan's main issue with Afghanistan is actually stemming from their alleged support of Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, which of course, they have denied it, but we have on numerous occasions, there are different evidences, there are different suggestions, of course, which sort of suggest that there are different linkages between the Afghan government and Tehrik-e-Taliban. And for that reason, again, it's sort of, again, it has become this bone of contention. However, the way I see it, insofar as keeping aside the geopolitical issues of Central Asia and the broader region, if you just look at Pakistan and Afghanistan, I think we first need to focus on this particular issue, treat it as a bilateral issue between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And perhaps in some ways, I guess one of the countries that could potentially be involved in some capacity as a mediator, perhaps, even though I don't think the two countries, given their history, they need a mediator of sorts, China could possibly play a crucial role, given the fact that China will, in the coming years, the way we see it, China will be playing a very crucial role in Afghanistan in the coming years in terms of infrastructure development, in terms of, again, establishing links with Afghanistan as well. And because, of course, just like Pakistan, China would also be wary of the increasing Indian influence in Afghanistan as well. The problem I see it, and I think it's part of your question, I guess, in some way it relates to your question. I am more concerned with what is happening right now between this triad that has emerged between Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India. And I think it's just, for one reason or another, I'm actually...
I'm going to come to that, because that is a very important factor.
Of course. We can come to that later on. We'll come to that later on. But for now, at least, the way I see it, I think that in terms of seeing it as a multilateral issue, we need to, I don't think we need to include Central Asia at this stage. I think it is first and foremost a bilateral issue between Pakistan and Afghanistan, especially considering the issues that we have in relation to terrorism specifically. And if it is to be seen as a multilateral issue, then perhaps in some ways, China can become part of this triad. But at this stage, insofar as Central Asia is concerned, at least for the coming future, I don't see Central Asia playing a major role insofar as Pakistan and Afghanistan and the relations between the two countries are concerned.
Okay. I'm going to explain basically what my approach has been. Right. I've talked about this in terms of a multi-level approach. There is the bilateral, then there is the trilateral, which is Pakistan, Afghanistan, China. Then there is the quadrilateral approach, and then there's a regional approach. And finally, a more international approach in and through the United Nations. the issue of involving the regional states, and this is what I want to take to Iftikhar, is that if you have states surrounding Afghanistan, all of which have certain common problems with that country, given its current configuration, then it appears to me to be eminently sensible to have a multi-level approach to deal with this. Now, Dr. Gillani has talked about China being a possible arbiter. The fact of the matter is that the Chinese have tried in Beijing. The Chinese are also prospecting in Afghanistan for the minerals. But at the same time, the Afghan Taliban regime has basically not given any guarantees to the Chinese. And the Chinese now have a military presence in Tajikistan. They're doing joint on the border, and they're doing joint exercises with the Tajikistan military, precisely because they have this problem with the ETIM, and Tajikistan has its own problem. So I believe that in trying to put concerted pressure on the Taliban regime, we need to have a multi-level approach. Would you agree with me, given that you constantly look at the situation?
To give you an answer, Ejaz, I mean, it's pretty complicated the way that I see it. One of the factors that has sort of made it even more complicated for states to actually give any kind of policy to deal with Afghanistan is that the stakes for non-state actors have been, or the bar for the non-state actors have been raised so high by Afghanistan that any sort of movement in any country that links it back to Afghanistan creates a sort of a reactionary measure from those countries. That's the first part of it. But then again, when you look at it, regionally, a lot of regional alliances have actually not managed to deliver from what the expectations from Afghanistan were until now. It hasn't happened. And I agree with, Dayyab that China could be a potential key stakeholder in resolving these conflicts. But that would have happened about a year and a half ago. I think that ship has long sailed. And I know firsthand that the Chinese, they tried and it hasn't worked out. Vis-a-vis the Chinese foreign policy, it does not work in ways in traditional conflict zones. So to sum it up in a very easy sentence, is that they think that war is not good for business. So any way that they will be, any kind of conflict, they seem to retract out of it rather than actually become part of it. So I think that under the current situation, China is sort of minus from Afghanistan, not from the sense that they will actually completely move out of it, or they will not observe it, or will not be part of any strategy that Pakistan is from. But I think that it's the way that their foreign policy reacts is that they will remain silent and probably be only there for giving out some kind of statements or support to Pakistan in one way or another.
Yeah.
Now, the building blocks, the way that they've actually been set up on a piece of on a chessboard, when we put it, at this point you've got Russia that actually recognizes the Afghan Taliban, and
Yeah.
you've got India, aware now rebuilding its relationship in a very bellicose way with Afghanistan. And so you can clearly see that this regional bloc actually includes Russia, it includes Afghanistan, and it includes India as well. Whereas then you have the Central Asian part and the Iranian part, who have to by default be part of this negotiation with Afghanistan. So they can't go completely bombastic against Afghanistan because the stakes are too high for several reasons, for which the ethnic factor is most dominant. And apart from that is that it's a geographic reality or a compulsion that you have to keep a relationship with Afghanistan. And then you have countries such as Pakistan and the US, who both simultaneously have grown closer to each other in the last year and a half. And that is sort of troubling Afghanistan. And so, even since October 9 has been one of those defining moments, that since we see the domino effect of Pakistan and Afghanistan's relationship being, literally sort of mowed down, literally everything that is known as a relationship or a standard relationship between the both countries in the last 2 decades has been completely demolished. And the statement that the Taliban spokesperson actually gave is that it's Pakistanis that are playing the USA's stakeholding in Afghanistan that is causing the problem. And this is an on the record statement.
It's one of those, yeah, it's one of those dissembling things. I mean, like Dr. Gillani also mentioned that they say that, we don't have the TTP here, which is obviously a
Yes.
blatant lie.
Yeah.
I mean, we've gone
So,
there, talked to the TTP there.
so
Initially, when we went and we talked to Sirajuddin Haqqani was the one who said that, we can't take them on directly, but we can facilitate talks between you and the TTP. So, everyone knows that they're there. But anyway, since you also mentioned India, and Dr. Gilani had also mentioned India, I said I'll circle back on that issue. Uh, we have a conflictual paradigm in the East, obviously. The Indians are deeply concerned ever since the ouster of Hasina Wajid about Bangladesh's approach to Pakistan. Now, we're concerned about the Indian approach to Afghanistan. So it's like, the Indians think that we kind of encircling them, and we think that they're kind of encircling us. So give me a sense of how much importance would you give to this recent sort of, Indian outreach to Afghanistan. In fact, it's a mutual outreach. And how can it negatively impact Pakistan's bilateral attempts to try and resolve this?
So, to be
No,
very brief.
this is for Dr. Gilani, and then I'll circle
Okay.
back.
Okay, sure.
Right. Thank you, Jas. Again, before I actually move on to this question, there's just one last point. I do broadly agree with Iftikhar, and but there's just one thing that I would like to add. Yes, China did try, and I think in some ways Iftikhar is right that China follows that model that war is not good for business. But having said that, I think one of the things we need to look at is the changing dynamics with Indian involvement in Afghanistan. It's just something that was not there roughly about a year ago. But with increased Indian interference or involvement in Afghanistan or in Afghan matters, China would definitely get interested. So that could possibly shift insofar as their policy is concerned, their geopolitical considerations are concerned, with growing Indian influence in Afghanistan. So it's not just for Pakistan. It's not just for Pakistan. Pakistan, yes, we have a heavily India-centric foreign policy, and that's how we tend to assess and make our geopolitical policies in general. But also considering the historical relations between China and India, China would obviously be concerned with growing or increasing Indian interference in Afghanistan. And moving that debate along, the recent rapprochement between India and Afghanistan and how that sort of plays out for us. I think Pakistan's, yes, you're right, there are strong links between Afghan Taliban and Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan. It doesn't matter. And they haven't actually openly refuted or denied these linkages as such as well. We know that the two were actually fighting together through a good course of this entire 2 decades of this war on terror and what followed in the aftermath of war on terror, and before the United States decided to pull out. So they're very close links between the two groups. They're even in terms of their operatives, in terms of their various commanders. There's a lot of trespass between the two. Having said that, we also have to keep in mind that for instance, after the Pahalgam attacks, for instance, when India built a rhetoric against Pakistan and used that rhetoric to actually attack Pakistan as well. So we have to be, we denied any kind of involvement. And as a matter of fact, again, there no actual group claimed responsibility for the Pahalgam attacks. So which sort of again makes the entire exercise redundant as well. But in geopolitics, we have to be considerate of these things as well. We know that countries tend to use proxies. It's not that Afghanistan, and the thing is that it's not that Afghanistan is actually actively using Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan or TTP as a a proxy against Pakistan. I think a lot of people in Pakistan, even within policy circles, are increasingly convinced that it's not that TTP is being used as a proxy by Afghan Taliban, it's just that they are not in a position to possibly do something about it. Perhaps because they are not strong enough themselves, perhaps because there are just some uncomfortable bonds between the two organizations owing to the closeness of um, what the two went through during the American invasion or during the time that American forces were present in Afghanistan. But it's not that the Afghan Taliban are actually using the Tehrik-e-Taliban as a proxy in Pakistan. And I think that's one of the factors that we have missed in our policy analysis as well. And I think as a result of that, we've created a very harsh policy towards the Afghan Taliban as well. I'm not, as I said from the very start, I haven't denied that there are linkages between the two groups. But at the same time, I also am in many ways convinced that Afghan Taliban are not necessarily using Tehrik-e-Taliban as a proxy to launch a proxy war in Pakistan. So it's just that kind of distinction that needs to be made. And we have to be careful with international politics in general. Even if states do tend to rely on proxies or are accused of using proxies or are accused of harboring proxies, you cannot sacrifice your entire relations because of that. The United States has been using proxies in Latin America for a good part of the last 70, 80 years.
They've used proxies in Libya, they've used proxies in Syria. So, yeah. But we by the way, I need to put this on record, and this is without prejudice to your point of view and your analysis. But we have a major difference difference of opinion here in terms of whether the TTA is using TTP as a proxy, because there is a lot of evidence, and my own analysis is that it makes eminent strategic sense for TTA to actually use the TTP as a leverage against Pakistan, specifically with reference to the recognized international border that Kabul still does not recognize and continues terms it as an imaginary line. Multiple statements by TTA leaders, but that is something which obviously is up for debate. But one other thing, Iftikhar, that I want to, and we have to be quick about our questions and answers because I need to close the program also. But how much of course, the TDP is there in Afghanistan, and the Afghans are also now part of, the raiding parties and all of that. But then we have local issues also within Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And that is something you're the best suited person to actually talk about those issues. What are those issues? And how are they kind of facilitating the ingress and the attacks that we see from the raiding parties that come in from Afghanistan?
I think if it has to be a very short answer, it's years of neglect. And then certain policy measures that haven't been made actionable. And the calm period, which was between 2000 and roughly between 2015 to 2019, the Pakistani state, the kind of assets that it should have created to create the stakes of the local tribes within the Pakistani system, it has failed to do so. And that actually has created that environment. And it could be multiple things, not just one factor alone, that actually has created the space in which an entity like TTP has got the leverage over the state. And that's as simple as it can be. And I think that there is no other way around. I think counter-terrorism, the way that it is understood, if the state still does not realize that it does not only mean the gun in the barrel, and it's beyond that, I think that we haven't learned anything in the last 20 years.
No, absolutely. I mean, the political issues are not part of the remit of this program. Otherwise, one could also talk about, the political issues in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and also in Balochistan, which also have an impact on what's happening or what's not happening.
Rather, Ejaz, I think that the new conflict actually is almost, if I don't make it equal, at least in my opinion, it's 60-40. So 60% of the problem is political.
Yeah, yeah, unfortunately. But Dr. Gilani, when you were at NACTA, and
Mhm.
I'm assuming that NACTA now is kind of defunct in its original, incarnation. But when you were at NACTA, what was
Mhm.
your assessment? I mean, you were the director of research and development, so obviously you were looking at the broader picture, and
Right,
I'm assuming that you were also giving your input in terms of recommendations.
right. Um, Before I answer that question, just a quick response to what you said as well. Again, with due respect, and I do respect where you're coming from, Ejaz, and I of course understand your sentiment as well. And I think I would actually like to build on what Iftikhar said. I completely agree with him that this is essentially what is happening. You can't really resort to guns and bombs. If anything, the last the war on terror, what followed afterwards, and after I think about 20, more than 20 years of fighting terrorism with brute force, the one lesson that we have actually learned is that terrorism cannot be defeated with brute force. And if we still haven't learned that lesson, I don't think we can learn anything. A lot of students ask me as well, if there's one lesson that we can draw from the war on terror, what lesson would that be? And I always say that, my response to that question is, and I think most of the academics, those of us who have been studying terrorism for a good part of the last 20 years, would also agree that, it's just, the one lesson that we can draw is that terrorism cannot be defeated with brute force. Terrorism is, for all intents and purposes, it's a social problem. As Iftikhar pointed out as well, I think it's more than political; it's actually a social problem. And I think at NACTA, it also, again, because I was director of the research and development wing, and my focus primarily was on the root causes, the drivers, the motivators. And before I actually comment on that, there's just one small observation that I had in relation to the statements that I made about Afghan Taliban and Tehrik-e-Taliban. I think we are actually standing at crossroads. We have to understand that the Afghan Taliban are a reality. We also have to understand that if the United States could not defeat them after staying in Afghanistan for more than 2 decades, then they are a reality. They are a reality that we have to confront, we have to face, we have to, in some ways, also acknowledge. And I think, and for that reason alone, I do not think that confrontation is the answer. I don't think that. Yes, you make some really good points, Ejaz, in terms of the kind of claims that they make in relation to the Durand line, or the fact that the kind of irredentist claims that they have made over the years, so on and so forth. But I don't think that those are areas that can be worked on, or that cannot be worked on through diplomacy. I don't think that those are areas that can be worked on through negotiations and dialogue. I don't think it's an issue of such gravity that would actually propel them to start a proxy war in Pakistan. I don't think they can afford to do that. It's the Afghan Taliban. They have been in power for about 2 3 years. I think there were a lot other considerations at the time. The very fact that they're the kind of, we know that how strict and rigid they are in terms of their interpretation of Islam, and then again they are, as opposed to Pakistan, they would go to India. That in itself suggests that the obligations, the responsibilities of statecraft, they're feeling that pressure as well. So
Yeah, but
I'm not sure.
this is precisely the issue, that there is the ideology and there is a certain kind of exegesis of the fiqh. But at the same time, what they're doing is pure statecraft, looking at what the leverages are. But this is a debate that you and I should have when both of us are analysts, rather than me being a moderator, because there is a
Yeah,
limit to what I can, how much I can intervene on that. But one final question to both of
yeah.
you, and quick responses.
To respond to the nectar question,
Yeah, well, that kind of yeah, go ahead, but
okay,
quickly.
I'll just quickly respond to the nectar question. Since I was basically director of the research and development wing, primarily my task, my job was, and I've had numerous discussions with Iftikhar as well, with this as well, It was in relation to making different policies. I did work extensively on creating the National Internal Security Policy of Pakistan, which is unfortunately still pending at the Interior Ministry for some reason for the last 1 year. But in addition to that, my focus was and has always been on addressing the drivers and the root causes of violent extremism, which is what essentially leads to terrorism. So it's about addressing root causes of terrorism. It's about focusing on culture, for instance. It's about focusing on curriculum, for instance. It's about focusing on communication. And so it's about addressing those very issues that exist in our society, which become structural over the passage of time, some structural factors that keep on reinforcing these ideas. And because of this, we often tend to treat terrorism or terrorists as fish that swim in water. So our job as a researcher is to drain that water. But unfortunately, I think there's this confusion at the policy level as well, and generally speaking in our society as well, still confusion about how much effort we need to put into addressing the root causes and drivers of violent extremism and terrorism. It requires a lot of patience, it requires a lot of time, of course, because we are looking at bringing about changes in our society and our societal attitudes. That would take a lot of time. By a lot, I mean it would take like roughly about 10 years. And considering the fact that we have been engaged in kinetics for more than 20 years, I think dedicating 10 years to this would actually make sense. So that's essentially what I did work on. But at the same time, again, we have to keep in mind, this being Pakistan, we are also confused about how much role should non-kinetic have. And this is what I think Iftikhar was referring to as well, that if we understand this is a political and a social problem, then if it is a political and social problem, then it requires political and social solutions as well, as opposed to resorting to kinetics. And our default response has been kinetics. But what you don't realize is that, we keep hearing in the news that, we have killed about 7 terrorists today. And the next day we hear, oh, we have killed about 15 terrorists today. So it creates the impression that there are 100 terrorists out there, and out of those 100, today we have killed about 25 terrorists. So now there are roughly about 75 terrorists remaining. But that's an illusion. That's wrong. It's wrong because, first of all, you kill 25 terrorists, but what about the kind of terrorists that it ends up producing, right? So there's a recycle at play. There is a recruitment at play. There is, again, those people. These very deaths themselves could possibly generate more recruits and more terrorists as well. So it creates the illusion that we have killed these many number of terrorists, and now because we have killed these many terrorists, now these many remain, and that's an illusion. That's an illusion.
I get your point. I have to now close the program also.
Okay.
I agree with you. I mean, counter-terrorism has always been a whack-a-mole problem, or call it the balloon effect. You put it down here and it pops up from somewhere else. All of that, any one of us who has studied this issue has dealt with this. But you also know, and it's quite obvious that, as I said in my opening, it's not a mathematical problem that you can QED at the end of it and you say you've got a solution. And I also believe that it's not about a single approach. You have to have multiple approaches. The kinetic is also part of it. The non-kinetic is also part of it. So it has to be a proper mix of multiple things, which is why I'm opposed to this binary about, the only way to deal with it is war. The only way to deal with it is to talk. These things are part of a mixed bag. But thank you so much to both of you for being on the program. Dr. Dayyab, Gillani, Iftikhar, Firdous, who is my go-to person always to discuss these things. And I'm happy that I've managed to do this because given the situation, I think these discussions and debates are very important.
Yeah.
Even when you do not agree with each other, there's always some point or the other that comes up which informs one's own analysis. And I think that is what is so important about this entire thing. Anyway, this is all from this episode. If you like the discussion, click on the subscribe button and send us comments. Until our next episode, goodbye and stay safe.